Was the last time you made a decision that was just for you? And not because your family needed it, and not because work demanded it, and not because someone else was counting on you, just because something inside you wanted it. If it's taking you a moment to answer, you're not alone. I don't think most women lose themselves overnight. It happens slowly. One responsibility, one season, one I'll get to that later at a time. Until one day you wake up and realize you become good at taking care of everyone else. And you're not entirely sure what you want anymore. And here's what I know. No matter what your story looks like, there comes a point where every woman is handed the same question. Who am I when no one else gets to answer that for me? I'm Kiley Suarez, and this is The Joy Shift. And this is where we have the conversations women often don't have until midlife about identity, reinvention, joy, and becoming the woman you've quietly been all along. Today, I want to talk about something I didn't even realize I was doing for years. I call it the permission trap. But before we talk about permission, I think we need to talk about space. Because sometimes the most important thing that happens in midlife isn't that life gets harder. It's that eventually life gets quieter. For years, my life was full. Not easy, but full. I was raising 2 kids, helping run my husband's medical practice, managing a household, keeping all of the moving pieces moving. And I want to be clear about something. I'm not telling you this as a complaint. I chose much of that life, and I loved much of that life. If you had asked me then whether I had room for something that belonged only to me, I probably would have laughed. And not because I didn't want anything for myself, because I couldn't imagine where it would fit. There wasn't room on the calendar. There wasn't room in my head. There wasn't even enough quiet to hear the question. Then little by little, life changed. Not all at once. The kids grew up. The practice found its rhythm. The emergencies became fewer. The calendar had a little more white space than it used to. And something surprised me. Nobody prepares you for what happens when life finally gets quieter. We spend years wishing for breathing room. Then one day it arrives. And instead of feeling peaceful, it feels unfamiliar. Because underneath all the noise, there's a voice you haven't heard in a very long time. And it's your own. Looking back now, I think that was the real beginning of my second act. And not because I suddenly changed my life. Because I finally had enough space to hear myself. And do you know what I heard? I wanted to write. Not emails, not grocery lists, a novel. Even saying that out loud felt strange. Maybe even a little ridiculous. I mean, who starts writing fiction in her 50s? Well, it turns out I did. But I didn't tell anyone. Not at first. I wrote in the early mornings, in the late evenings, before anyone else was awake or asleep, after they'd gone to bed. A few pages here, a few pages there, almost secretly. And not because anyone would have stopped me. My husband wouldn't have, my family wouldn't have, the people who loved me would have cheered me on. That wasn't the problem. The problem was me. I wasn't sure I was allowed to want something that belonged only to me. That realization still catches me because I could manage a household, help run a business, raise children, handle crises, make difficult decisions, but saying I want to write a novel, somehow that felt harder. Looking back, I don't actually think writing was the gift. Writing was simply the doorway. The gift was discovering that there was still a part of me waiting to be met. For me, she introduced herself through writing. For you, it may be something completely different. Maybe it's painting, maybe it's traveling, maybe it's going back to school. Maybe it's starting a business. Maybe it's volunteering. Maybe it's finally taking piano lessons. It almost doesn't matter what it is. What matters is this. Something in you finally has enough room to speak. The question is, will you listen? Most conversations about women in midlife assume we're all living the same story. We're not. Different paths, different roles, different decades, different stories, but same question. Who are you when the roles start getting quieter? A few months ago, I was talking with a coaching client. On paper, she had everything she'd worked for. Successful career, long marriage, kids doing well, the life she'd spent decades building. I asked her one question. Who are you when nobody needs anything from you? And she looked at me, didn't answer, just sat there. After a long silence, she laughed, and then she cried. Finally, she whispered, I don't know. And not because she didn't have the answer, because she'd never realized she'd stopped asking the question. That conversation has stayed with me. And because I don't think she's unusual, I think she's us. We've spent so many years becoming who life needed us to be that when life finally asks, who are you? We reach for the checklist, the wife, the mother, the executive, the caregiver, the business owner, the volunteer, the friend. But those are roles, and they're important roles, beautiful roles, necessary roles, but they're still roles. They describe what you've done. They don't always tell you who you are. And maybe that's why checking every box doesn't always bring the peace that we expected. Because the checklist built your life. It was never meant to tell you who you are. That coaching conversation stayed with me for days. And not because her answer surprised me, because I realized I could have been the one sitting in that chair. And maybe you could too. I think so many of us spend decades becoming exactly who life asks us to become. We become dependable, responsible, capable. We become the woman everyone can count on. And somewhere along the way, we quietly stopped asking ourselves who we're becoming. And not because we don't care, because there simply isn't time. Life is asking so much of us that we keep telling ourselves, I'll think about that later. Then later arrives, the children grow up, work changes, retirement gets closer, the calendar finally has a little breathing room, and the question we postponed for 20 years quietly walks back into the room. What do I want now? Not what should I do? Not what's expected of me? Not what makes everyone else comfortable? What do I want? I don't think that's a selfish question. I think it's one of the most honest questions a woman can ask. And I also think that it's one of the hardest because so many of us have spent years waiting for permission to ask it. I've started calling this the permission trap, not because I think we're weak. Quite the opposite. I think capable women fall into it hardest. Here's why. When you're capable, people trust you. They rely on you. They ask you to carry more. And because you're good at carrying it, you do. Until one day you realize you become so good at meeting everyone else's expectations that you've stopped listening to your own desires. For years, I thought I was waiting for the right season, the kids to get older, the schedule to settle down, the timing to be better. Maybe you've said those things too. When things calm down after this project, once everyone else is okay, that sounds responsible. But if I'm honest, they are also hiding something. Because when life finally did calm down, I still hesitated. That's when I realized I wasn't waiting for time. I wasn't waiting for circumstances. I was waiting for permission to want something that belonged only to me, permission to take myself seriously, permission to stop introducing myself only through the roles I'd always played. And here's the part that was hardest to admit. No one was withholding that permission. Not my husband, not my family, not my circumstances. It was me. That was uncomfortable to realize, but it was also freeing because if I was the only one withholding permission, maybe I could also be the one to give it. Can I tell you what I believe now? Midlife isn't asking you to become someone new. It's inviting you to remember the parts of yourself you stopped making room for. There's a difference. Becoming someone new sounds exhausting. Coming home to yourself feels possible. That's what writing did for me. And not because I woke up one day and decided to be an author. I didn't. I started writing at 5 a.m. before anyone else was awake, before anyone could ask me what I was doing or why, before I had to explain it to myself. And somewhere in those early mornings, I remembered something. I was still curious. I hadn't lost that. I just stopped making room for it. And that's what I want for you. Not my story, yours. Your doorway might look completely different from mine. And that's exactly right. The doorway doesn't matter. Walking through it does. So can I leave you with something simple this week? Not homework, just one shift. I call this the 5% rule, and it's the only thing I want you to use this week. You don't have to burn your life down to change it. You just need that 5% shift. That's how you find yours. I want you to notice one sentence you've been saying to yourself. Maybe it's too late. Who am I to do that? People like me don't. Maybe someday. Write it down. Then ask yourself one question. Who gave me that story? Because it may not actually be yours. Then ask a second question. If I didn't need anyone else's permission, what would I do next? Not next year, not when everything is perfect, this week. That's your 5%. One phone call, one email, one class, one conversation, one page, one tiny act that says, I'm listening. Because that's all reinvention really is. 5% shift, listening and then answering. If today's conversation felt like someone finally put words to something you've been carrying, please don't let it become another episode you agree with and then forget by tomorrow. Insight is a beautiful beginning, but it is not the finish line. The real shift happens when you choose something different. That's exactly why I created From Stuck to Second Act, an 8-week small group coaching experience for women who are done waiting for the right moment and ready to finally ask the questions they've been avoiding. And not because you need fixing. You don't. Because I know what it feels like to stand in the space between the life that you built and the life that's quietly calling your name. This founding cohort is limited to 10 women. And that's not a marketing line. That's the point. Real conversation requires a real room. And because this is the first time I'm running this, the access and the investment will never look like this again. We'll ask better questions. We'll have honest conversations. We'll stop waiting for certainty before we begin, and we'll do it together. Because here's what I've learned. Transformation doesn't happen because someone gives you the perfect answer. It happens because you stop pretending you don't hear the questions your heart has been asking for years. If that sounds like the room you've been looking for, start with the permission audit in the show notes. It takes 10 minutes and it'll tell you more about where you are than a year of thinking about it. And if it resonates, the landing page is right there to put yourself on the priority list. Come take a look. Before I go, I want you to remember something. The checklist built your life. Honor it. Be grateful for it. But don't expect it to tell you who you are. That's your work now. And maybe that's the most beautiful work you'll ever do. You are not behind and you're not too late. And you're not asking for too much. And if your heart keeps calling you towards something more, listen. That voice isn't here to make you restless. It's here to lead you home. Until next week, keep choosing yourself, one joyful shift at a time. I'll see you next Tuesday.